Good evening, everybody. This is Darius Hassemi. Welcome to another episode of Unfiltered, uh, GWire's weekly podcast, coming to you live from Fresno, California. Tonight, um, we have two special guests: Board of Supervisors Chairman at Fresno County, Garry Bredefeld, and Alex Tavlian, a political analyst and strategist, wears a few other hats as well. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm going to keep you on because we're going to dive right into this to our main topic. Um, but actually, no, keep you on. But let's start up with the poll that we had out um, uh, over the weekend on this measure. Let's put up slide number 8. So 68% of respondents basically said if that they don't support the half-cent sales tax extension if they were to vote on this thing today. Um, so let me just dive in. Garry, you put this initiative on, or I should say this resolution on, whatever the name of it is, to do a study before the vote. The signatures on that's on the ballot can go to the ballot measure can go to the voters in November.
Well, I didn't put the resolution on by law. It had to be put on. If I had the choice, it wouldn't have been put on the agenda today. But the
Okay.
fact is it had to be by law.
Okay, explain that to us and explain the vote today that occurred.
Well, when they certified the votes in terms of them meeting the threshold, by law, it had to come on to the agenda of the Board of Supervisors. We had two choices: vote to move it to the November ballot, or vote to do a study doing an analysis of the measure, and it has to be done within 30 days. And that would then come back to the board, and then we would be required to put it on the ballot at that point. The problem for those proponents is that it would have to be come back before August 7th. That's the latest deadline for it to get on the November ballot. The next time we meet is after August 7th, and it's not likely that we'll have the study completed before August 7th anyway, because of all the work that's involved, and there's a lot of work involved in analyzing this measure. So, and what happened today is the board, by majority, myself, Supervisor Magzik, and Supervisor Mendez voted to do the study. The board could have voted not to do the study and just move it to the November ballot. I think that would have been very unwise. So the majority agreed to do the study and have it come back to the board.
Okay. What is the study going to look at?
It's going to look at all aspects of this measure, what the fiscal impacts are to the county. It can look at the impacts to the general plan. It can look at impacts to development. It can look at what impacts there'll be to the roads, whether what it professes to do it will actually do, what adverse impacts there might be to the county. So we expect our professionals to do a deep dive into this and provide that feedback to us. And it's not only providing it to us, it's providing it to the public, because the public will have this information and they can use that information to determine whether or not they want to vote for this. If we don't get it back before August 7th, it will have to go to the March 2028 ballot, and it will be voted on at that point. So it will be voted on, whether it's in November or March was, I think, what people were really trying to determine today because of the study.
Got it. And that's the vote count again on the screen. So Supervisor Chavez and Pacheco did not support that study.
Correct.
Okay. So let me bring in Alex Tavlian. Alex, so how much money was spent on gathering these signatures, and how many signatures were gathered? And then do you know the source of the funding for that?
Yeah, so the total number of signatures, I'll start with what was required. The proponents had to gather roughly 21,000 signatures, or 10% of the voter turnout in the 2022 gubernatorial general election. So 4 years ago, that general election, they had to take 10% of that turnout, and that's what you have to go and secure. In this case, they went out and secured, I think it was like almost 35,000. They had a lot of signatures. And so the principal backers, the biggest funders of this measure was the Central Valley Community Foundation, which is the nonprofit run by former Fresno Mayor Ashley Swearingen. Additionally, you had support from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Fresno Building Healthy Communities, and then outside of those kind of nonprofit groups, also Youth Leadership Institute had provided a lot of in-kind support with volunteers. But the other big funder in this, alongside Central Valley Community Foundation, was the Northern California Carpenters Union, which 4 years ago was a very big opponent of that year's Measure C renewal. And so they collectively spent probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about $750,000 in actual cash and also in-kind support that was, material or individual bodies to help gather signatures, at least according to campaign filings turned in back in the run-up to the June primary. And we'll have a better idea, to be perfectly honest with you, in a couple of weeks, because their next filing is due at the end of this month. And so that number may have creeped a little bit higher to pay for lawyers, to pay for consultants. As we found out today, they paid for their own economic study from the same economist who conducted 2 studies on the failed Measure E, issues from 2020 and 2022. And so, 2022 and 2024. And so, there's a lot of spending that's been going on behalf of this proposed measure to get it to this place. And so, it's a lot of money on the table, a lot at stake. I will say it is shocking to see a measure with that much money in play not able to clear the random sample. And so the reason why we even got to this point today is, Supervisor will know, is, generally when you go through and submit that many signatures, the clerk conducts a random sample of the signatures. If you reach a certain threshold of valid signatures in that sample, you're automatically deemed to have met the requirements, and they don't have to go do an individual analysis of every single signature that was submitted. Well, they failed to meet that requirement, triggering them to go through a whole hand count of every signature that was submitted. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor, but I think they were up against not making it even then. They said something like, by the time they concluded analyzing the signatures, there were 2,000. I think James Goose was saying there were like 2,000 signatures left to be evaluated by the time they got to 21,000 signatures.
Well, I thought it was less than that, but
it was very small. I mean, and it was funny he mentioned that, because he said it was only a few thousand left to count totally by the time they hit the minimum. And then he, in the same breath, said, "Oh, the validity rate wasn't that bad." And it's like, it sounded pretty bad when you submitted almost 35,000 to hit 21,000. A lot of signatures, were duplicates or not valid, not registered to vote, and still submitting.
Let me ask this question. Why is Central Valley Community Foundation so interested, and former Mayor Swearingen and some of these nonprofits so interested in this measure, to have some sales tax?
well,
I'll defer to the Supervisor.
Go ahead, Alex.
I mean, the answer is simple. They want to see their imprint on dollars they could potentially control. Let's be honest. There, in the county of Fresno, there are not a lot of discretionary dollars that Sacramento isn't already programming for a purpose. Measure C, and our road tax is pretty much the only one in the county. And we've seen the model for this built out in the city of Fresno with Measure P, which was a tax that didn't exist until 5-6 years ago. And it, they basically invented a category that needed a policy prescription. We needed to fix our parks and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we taxed to make it happen, with ostensibly the back end of that being, a benefit to the community, in air quotes, but also to accomplish policy aims of the Central Valley Community Foundation, led by the former mayor, who really wanted to get that tax approved before she left office, but also all of the nonprofits who want to ostensibly benefit from and really push the direction of those dollars to their pet goals and agendas.
Got it. So let's put up slide 24. That kind of shows some of these folks that's involved that Alex is talking about. Is that them, Alex?
Yeah, that's them. I mean, we have the Central Valley Community Foundation, which is, up until I think it's 2016 or 2017, was really, a philanthropic holding ground that is, you just morphed into this Franken monster of progressive politics and agenda and policy agendas. It's less focused on driving social good through philanthropy from the community for the community, and more driven at recruiting dollars from billionaire benefactors to our community to put their thumbprint on our on the outlook of the valley.
Got it. Now let's put up, so Central Valley Community Foundation, I think we have a image of their board. Their board members are on that, but we've invited their chair and vice chair. Let's put up slide 28 to this show to explain their role in giving direction or taking direction from the former mayor Swearingen, or is it the board that's saying, hey, we got to go spend the money this way? So, and unfortunately, they have not responded to our request. Why is the Carpenters Union involved heavily on this, Alex?
I don't have a good answer for that. I can tell you, as someone who has run a transportation infrastructure measure like Measure C, the Carpenters are not the natural constituency to support this. So I'll dispense with the pleasantries, which is that a lot of politics is selfish. A lot of people want to, they have an agenda or an aim. With these measures, there are kind of natural constituencies to support financially these measures, and a big one are the building trades, unions that actually do the work of building transportation infrastructure, building roads, highways, bridges, and the kind of the frontline group in there is generally the operating engineers. They operate, a union that supports heavy machine operators that pave and do all of the work that's necessary to build roads and bridges. They're a leading factor. Laborers are another big one. Occasionally in some communities, not so much in the Central Valley, but elsewhere, the Teamsters are a big element of that as well. You have a lot of unions that do contribute to these because there are direct job benefits to having this measure approved. There's going to be work for everyone. Well, in the case of Measure C, and really in these measures generally, the Carpenters are not one of the unions that has that. They don't really benefit from Measure C as we know it. And it's funny, today, one of the big queries that came down from Supervisor Magsig during his inquisition, is what I'm going to call it, was a question about utilizing Measure C dollars to build out affordable housing. And I think if I'm looking for a place where I could see an imprint from the Carpenters, that's probably the likeliest of the bunches, where there's an ability to sort of perverse the use of dollars for something that's totally unrelated to transportation, but does have a direct benefit for one of the backers.
Got it. Bill, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so, I can answer that about the affordable housing. The answer was that the funding would go for the infrastructure to support affordable housing. So you had a nexus there. The question I have for Alex is this one. 2 Fresno Unified trustees, Andy Levine and Veva Islas, have been featured prominently in this campaign for better roads, safe streets. In fact, Andy Levine, who represents the Fresno High area on the Fresno Unified School Board, was the campaign spokesperson. What, and you're a political analyst, from your perspective, what are the optics of 2 trustees from a school district with so many challenges, not the least of which is plummeting enrollment, spending so much of their time being involved in this political campaign that ended up being so divisive.
I'll put it this way. I'm not certain that the Fresno Unified School District is currently capable of teaching kids to read. And so if you're not capable of teaching our kids to read, I don't know if you're capable of building a road. I'm just going to start there. But it's a terrible optics. I mean, they're awful optics. This is the failed state of our community right here. The Fresno's civic rot starts at Fresno Unified School District. It starts with just poor management, poor oversight, limited willingness to go out and challenge a culture that's failing. And now you want the people who have ruined Fresno County's, largest educational institution to go out and build our roads and fund our transportation network? I don't think so. They can't even get our schools to run. They can't even, this is the worst part. They can't keep the air conditioning on at our schools. And it's July 14th. I can tell you right now, and you can set a clock to it. I will set the over under on number of air conditioners at Fresno Unified that are broken come August 21st at probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50. So it's like, at the end of the day, these are people who can't even deal with their own infrastructure challenges, but they feel like they've got the answer for our community. I'd love to hear what Supervisor Bredefeld has to say about that, though, because
Garry, anything on that?
Yeah, well, I think they got a progressive, liberal, I'll call them radical extremists, because their views and their politics are extremist, and that's what this measure was about. When you're forcing people to put 120 miles of bike lanes, when you're funding, which destroys streets, just look at the Tower District, when a significant majority is going for public transportation. It's not the measure that you're professing it's going to be, particularly when you have $1.5 billion with a B of deferred maintenance in the county and in the city. It's not enough. And so these guys were promoting an agenda that is not going to meet the promises that they're offering to constituents. And when I was out campaigning for a year and a half, walking the precincts, nobody said to me, get me a bus here. They said, fix my road, fix my street. It's been promised to me for 20, 30 years. They didn't say, give me a bike lane, a scooter, or a bus. And that's what I told these people during COG, and they refused to listen, absolutely refused to listen. And I think that's why we are where we are.
Good points. Before we dive in, let me actually ask one more question, and then I'm going to bring Bill on. Let's put slide 21 up. And that's going to compares the 25 plus 4% transit versus the other initiative. Bill?
Yeah, Darius, thank you. Just a note I wanted to make is that, including me, I call the group that promoted this, progressive activists. But when you look at their proposal, they're really regressive. These are old, failed ideas. And people know that Garry Bredefeld and I, we have strong debates and often disagree. But Gary's on the mark on this. And why would they want to cram bike lanes, or at least millions, tens of millions of dollars for bike lanes, when we have 30 years of showing they don't work, at least not the kind of bike lanes they built. And I say that as someone who has ridden a bicycle thousands of more miles than that whole group combined. It's not for transportation. Most of the bikers around here, it's about recreation. And years ago, by the Swearingen administration, we were promised bike trails that followed the path of Fresno Irrigation District canals. They'd be fenced, they'd have trees over them, they'd be beautiful. They'd be like the Clovis Trail, which is packed with people. That has gone away. Instead, they want cyclists to commute in 105-degree temperatures to work, where they're going to have to take a shower and change their clothes and everything else, and also be subject to very dangerous situations. It's proven in Fresno how high the accident rate is involving pedestrians and cyclists. This would not improve it. It would make it bigger. So get that off the table. The other thing is 30 years. Are you kidding me? No one has any idea what transportation is going to look like in 30 years. I don't often agree with Diane Pierce, but in her op-ed, I said, that's something she's right on about. It needs to be shorter. And then if we are talking about economic vitality, we ought to give more than 1% to the airport, because the airport is, starting to drive the Fresno economy. People want it for travel. It brings people here. They spend money in our city. So to me, progressive, this thing is not progressive at all. It's regressive. Many of the ideas are failed,
And Bill,
proven to have failed.
I would also add, during COG, again, I told these activists, 30 years is insane. You passed, we had Measure C passed twice with 20-year measures. Why would you go to a 30-year measure? As Diane said in her op-ed, you don't know what the transportation situation is going to be 30 years. You don't know what it's going to be 5 years, 10 years from now. You don't know what's going to be happening. The automotive industry is changing so dramatically. You have no idea. And yet they wanted 30 years and they pushed it. And that's what they did. And the mayors, 11 of them, just caved. And we could talk about the threats that Ashley and her group made early on, that if you don't give in to what we want, we will bring our own measure. We'll pass the 50+1. So get on board with us. And they all caved. And that's how we ended up where we were.
I said this several months ago, maybe almost a year ago, when both of these measures were going up. It needs to have congestion relief, and it can't be 30 years, because we, exactly as all of you have said, and many folks already know, 30 years is way too long. In a world that's seeing rapid change in everything from AI technology, the way we drive, the autonomous cars that are coming, we have no idea. And by the way, why do we have 40-foot buses, or however long they are? Why can't we update our buses, cost less, more efficient, and less expensive to operate, instead of just adding more money for transit? Okay, so Andy Levine, I'm sorry, let me go back. Andy Levine and Veva Eslas were the two Fresno Unified School Board members that are the face or supporting this measure.
Well, for Levine, he's the face. He's been technically he's the campaign manager, although I don't know about for how much longer right now. I think he's on a sabbatical now. But he's been the campaign manager. Veva Eslas is a pretty prominent surrogate in support of it. But there's a cast of thousands. There's more politicians at these press conferences than actual people. To be perfectly honest with you, and not a lot of average people speaking out in support of this. It's a lot of elected officials, which is not inherently a bad thing, but let's just call a spade a spade. And so yeah, they're the ones who are in front of it. I did want to circle back on one thing Bill mentioned, which is trails. One of the biggest knocks on this measure, and it doesn't make any sense to me as someone who's had to, digest quite a bit of material coming out of CVCF and these other organizations, is that this measure defunded recreational trails. You cannot utilize this measure's funding if it was approved. You cannot utilize it for recreational trails. So the city of Clovis, which built its trail system on the back of Measure C, could not do it to expand it or grow it. And the city of Fresno can't use it at all because their trail system doesn't exist. There is no trail system in the city of Fresno.
Nathan Magsafe exposed that to perfection today.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And one other thing I'll add, you said there were a lot of politicians. What you didn't see at these rallies they had were conservatives. You didn't see conservative politicians standing there and supporting it. And if we're going to pass a Measure C, you better see conservatives, you better see liberals, you better see everybody together, united on a measure that we can all support. Because without it, it's not going to pass.
Yeah, that's very true. It's the biggest knock on this thing is it trades one end of the spectrum for another.
And what I shared with them also at COG was this past measure was voted down in Northeast Fresno, Northwest Fresno, and Clovis. And I said, you're ignoring what these people want, and I know what they want because I talked to them for a year and a half walking. and they don't want what you're selling. You need to change, and they could care less.
Got it. Thank you, Gary. Let me transition into the Newsom Foundation. Alex,
Yeah.
you have a lot of information on that and how Central Valley Foundation.
Well, it's funny. It's hilarious that we wind up on the same, kind of in the same network here. The same organization that financed this measure is catching a little bit of like a couple of strays for some of their other activities. CVCF has become sort of this like I don't know, government in exile is what I will call it. It's like a shadow government that doesn't really, it would like the regular government to do exactly what it says it should do and prescribe policy, prescriptions for all of our ills, all of our communities' ills. Where these ideas are coming from is beyond me, but in the last couple of weeks, there's been news of ongoing investigations centering around the Newsoms, Gavin Newsom and his wife Jennifer, and some of their taxes, some of their other dealings. You've got members of the Newsom administration wearing wires like they're in the mob, informing on the governor and his team as part of the Dana Williamson investigation on, stealing money from Javier Becerra and all these other people. One of the interesting elements of this investigation, though, is centered on the Newsom's unusual practice compared to past governors and other elected officials in the state of what the state of California calls behesting payments, but you and I would probably call shaking people down for money to support pet projects and causes. And so the Newsoms have, completely changed what it means to behest contributions in support of their, pet causes. They've raked in millions of dollars to nonprofits they control or that ostensibly benefit them. But what's interesting is, as culling through all these nonprofits and all these contributions coming from big name donors, big corporate donors, is the fact that the Central Valley Community Foundation, which is run by the former mayor Fresno, Ashley Swearingen, was serving as a fiscal sponsor of Jennifer Newsom's California Partners Project, which was some kind of a holding entity for contribute for all sorts of initiatives that she was running off the taxpayer dime and on nonprofit money instead. And what we found, and there's been a couple of investigations that have gone on around this, looking at these numbers, but maybe the most jarring on my end, in like sifting through this, is the fact that, in 2024, an entity behested roughly $100,000 to CVCF for the benefit of Jen Newsom's nonprofit, the California Partners Project. 9 days after that contribution, Newsom announced the award of a $14 million no-bid contract to the Central Valley Community Foundation for their Jobs First Collaborative the state's Jobs First Collaborative program. And so it's fascinating to see, again, a nonprofit that, 10 years ago was handling local residents' philanthropic giving for, charities and other initiatives that were very philanthropic oriented, now turning into like a political laundering machine for the governor of California on one hand, and then gaining, multi-million-dollar contracts to basically do policy think tank projects on the other hand. And it's just one hand's washing the other. And so it's going to be interesting to see as the DOJ investigation of the Newsoms materializes. What is the nexus? What are the drivers of these behest payments that are running through a Central Valley nonprofit that's getting significant state contracts without any competitive bidding whatsoever?
Great points. We're going to ask Ashley Swearingen, former mayor, to join us next couple of weeks to address and answer some of these questions. And I hope that she will, and Alex, that you will join back up with those. Any other comments before we wrap up today, gentlemen?
No,
Okay.
I think it was a good day, and it was a good day for the citizens of Fresno County, quite honestly. They were the winners today, and I couldn't be more pleased and grateful to my colleagues for doing the right thing today.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Bill.
Thank
Have
you.
a great week and see you guys next Tuesday. Good night,
Thank you
everybody.
guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.